We are reading through the book of Matthew, taking a chapter a day, doing it this whole month. Doing so as a congregation so that we can learn more about it, dig into God's word, and try and get some of the nuggets that might be not initially clear, but let's go a little bit behind the scenes. So today I want to go behind the scenes on Matthew 9. Now, on the surface, we see a lot of healings, not just in Matthew 9, but in other places. But in Matthew 9, Jesus heals a lot. It starts out where he heals a paralytic, and then he heals a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, it says, and he heals a girl who appeared to be dead. The father said she's dead. Jesus said she's asleep and wakes her up. And then later, he heals two blind men. After that, here was somebody who was mute. He heals it. I mean, it's very clear Jesus has compassion on people. In fact, that's how Matthew 9 ends, where it talks about the multitudes that he had compassion on. Now, there's one particular piece that I want to focus on, and that's a story from Matthew 9, verses 18 through 26. Now, just a little behind the scenes information first. The Jews at that time would often wash themselves. This was the baptized, that they would become ritually clean, we talk about. And that's because it talks throughout the Old Testament. Here are what you need to do to be clean, and here's what you need to avoid to be unclean. For example, a woman who just had a baby, from all the blood, she is unclean for a number of days. If you touch a dead body, because a dead body is unclean, therefore you would become unclean. And that's one of the keys there. If you are unclean and somebody touches you, then they are unclean. Now you're both unclean. And you would have to wait the required amount, do whatever sacrifices, etc. While you're unclean, there's a lot of activities you can't do. Like I say, you can't be touched by a person who is clean. You can't go to the temple, all sorts of things. You wouldn't be welcome a lot of times in the marketplace, things like that in normal society. In this story, though, we see that Jesus turned that on its head twice. First of all, we see a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years come from behind and touch the hem of his garment, verses 20 and 21. She said to herself, if only I could touch his garment, I shall be made well. Jesus turns around because he knows that she's there and says, be of good cheer, daughter, your faith has made you well. And she was made well from that hour. Her touching him, touching the hem of his garment, didn't make him unclean. His purity, his personhood, his godhood made her clean. And in the same piece, we see it again. In verse 18, while Jesus was speaking to people, a ruler came out, worshiped him, saying, my daughter has just died, but if you will please lay your hands on her, she will live. He gets there. Jesus comes into the ruler's house. He said, make room, for the girl is not dead, but just sleeping. So had she died and then Jesus rose her from that? Was she not dead at all? But by all accounts, she was dead. That's why they had the flute players there. It was mourning music. But he took her by the hand. He touched her, and the girl rose. Her dead, her whatever, didn't make him clean. Who he was brought her life, made her clean. Not just here in Matthew 9, but in other places where Jesus had touched something or someone that anybody else would have been made unclean. But when it was touched by Jesus, we see the purity of God, the holiness of God that makes it clean, makes it well, makes it whole again. That's why Jesus had so much compassion and why he healed. He wasn't unclean. He brought them and restored them back to life. Just a little nugget from Matthew 9.